27 years. One man, one cell. But behind those iron bars wasn't just a prisoner. It was a heartbeat of a nation waiting to be free. He was called a terrorist by some, a hero by others. But to millions, he was simply Madiba. This isn't just a story of a man. It's a story of courage, sacrifice, and a dream so powerful it shook the chains of oppression. Before the president, before the Peace Prize, there was the fight. And it began long before Robben Island, long before the world knew the name Nelson Mandela. There was a boy named Ralila, born in the rolling hills of Kunu in 1918. His name in Xhosa meant pulling the branch of a tree, or more loosely, troublemaker. It was a name that would, in time, prove prophetic not for mischief, but for a man who would shake the very roots of injustice. Raised in the traditions of the Thembu people, young Ralila ran barefoot through grasslands, herded cattle, and listened to fireside stories of African kings and warriors. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakeni-Iswa, was a respected chief and counselor to the Thembu royal house, a man of pride and principle. When his father lost his title after a dispute with colonial authorities, Mandela learned his first lesson in standing for what you believe, no matter the cost. After his father's death, Mandela was sent to live in the palace of Chief John Jintaba Dalanjibo, a regal world of discipline and tradition. It was here that the boy from Kunu saw the inner workings of leadership and justice. He watched elders debate, resolve conflicts, and lead with dignity. But it was also where he began to see the cracks in the system that ruled over them. The inequality, the segregation, the laws that denied his people their rights. He attended missionary schools, was baptized a Methodist, and was eventually given the name Nelson by a schoolteacher, a common practice in colonial education. He didn't choose the name, but the world would come to know it. Still, Ralila remained within him, quietly growing into a man who would one day trouble the very foundations of apartheid. This was not yet the leader, not yet the prisoner, not yet the president. But in the hills of Kunu, the seeds were planted, and they were destined to grow. The young man who left Kunu carried more than a name. He carried a quiet fire. In Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela found a city buzzing with contradictions, industry and poverty, white privilege and black struggle. He took work as a law clerk and studied by night at the University of Witwatersrand, rubbing shoulders with radicals, thinkers, and future revolutionaries. It was here that Mandela's vision sharpened. No longer just a son of the soil, he became a man of purpose. The brutal laws of apartheid were tightening, passed laws, land acts, racial segregation. It wasn't just policy, it was pain. Pain etched into the daily lives of black South Africans. Mandela could no longer stand on the sidelines. He joined the African National Congress, ANC, first as a young activist, then as a founding member of the ANC Youth League. The Youth League demanded bolder action, mass mobilization, and a break from the polite protests of the past. Mandela rose quickly, his voice firm, his presence magnetic. He spoke not only in courtrooms but in townships, rallying people with a vision of equality and dignity. Then came the Defiance Campaign in 1952, nonviolent resistance on a national scale. Thousands were arrested for deliberately disobeying unjust laws. Mandela, as its national volunteer-in-chief, was sentenced to 9 months in prison, suspended for 2 years. It was a risk he willingly took. But when peaceful resistance was met with bullets, especially after the 1960 Sharpeville massacre, Mandela and others made a fateful decision. The ANC was banned. Thousands were detained. The time for passive protest they believed had passed. Mandela co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation, the armed wing of the ANC. He became a man on the run, dubbed the Black Pimpernel, constantly moving, training, organizing. He traveled abroad to build support, and yet he knew the cost. He returned to South Africa, knowing the police were closing in. In 1962, Mandela was captured. He stood in court and did not beg for mercy. Instead, he declared, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The fire of resistance had become an unquenchable blaze. But Mandela's greatest test was yet to come, behind prison walls. The gates of Robben Island clanged shut behind him in 1964, sealing away not just a man but a symbol. Nelson Mandela, now prisoner for 66/64, 466 prisoner that year, was sentenced to life imprisonment. But what the apartheid regime intended to be a tomb became a forge. The island, just off the coast of Cape Town, was cold, windswept, and unforgiving. Mandela's cell was no larger than a walk-in closet. A thin mat on the floor his only bed. By day, he and other political prisoners broke stones under the sun. By night, they studied, debated, and dreamed of freedom. The prison wardens tried to crush them. Letters were censored or delayed. Family visits were rare and painfully short. He was denied the touch of his children for years. Yet, the spirit of Robben Island was unbroken. Mandela became a father figure to inmates and even, quietly, a teacher to his jailers. He spent 18 of his 27 imprisoned years on that island. Over time, the world beyond its shores began to speak his name. Free Nelson Mandela, echoed in protests from London to Lusaka, in concerts, universities, and parliaments. The man the regime tried to silence had become a global rallying cry. Inside, Mandela practiced the politics of patience. He learned the language of his enemies, Afrikaans, and studied their fears. He believed that true change would only come through dialogue, not vengeance. Slowly, the walls between prisoner and warden, black and white, began to crack. In the 1980s, as apartheid began to wobble under pressure, secret talks with the government began. Mandela, still in prison, negotiated not just for himself, but for the dignity and rights of his people. He never begged. He never bargained away principle. Then in 1990, after 27 years, the gates finally opened. Mandela walked out, fist raised, gray-haired yet unbowed. The world held its breath. A warrior of silence had returned to lead a nation. The date was February 11, 1990. After 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela stepped into the sunlight, his right fist raised, hand in hand with Winnie Mandela. It was more than a release. It was a resurrection. Millions watched in silence and tears. The man who had once been branded a terrorist now stood as the hope of a divided nation. But freedom was not instant peace. South Africa teetered on the edge of civil war. Townships burned, political factions clashed, and old wounds bled fresh. Mandela, newly free, walked straight into a storm. Yet he met it with the same calm resolve that had carried him through decades of captivity. He preached reconciliation, not revenge. Unity, not division. Even when the temptation to retaliate boiled over in communities still oppressed and angry, Mandela insisted, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." He stood shoulder to shoulder with his former jailers in negotiations that many believed would fail. The Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, was tense, filled with walkouts and near breakdowns. But Mandela's strength lay not just in his words, but in his will. He was unshakable. In 1993, he shared the Nobel Peace Prize with F.W. de Klerk, the man who had helped dismantle apartheid. It was a symbol of the bridge they had built between black and white, past and future. Then came the historic election of April 27, 1994. For the first time, every South African, regardless of race, had a voice. The people chose Mandela, not just as president, but as healer-in-chief. His inauguration was not a victory speech. It was a call to rebuild. He wore a bright Madiba shirt, smiled like a man who had seen too much, and declared, "Never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." From the prison yard to the presidential palace, Mandela's walk had not ended. It had only just begun, for a nation and for the world. Nelson Mandela served only one term as president, but in those 5 years, he laid the foundation for a new South Africa. He didn't seek power, he sought peace. And in stepping down willingly in 1999, he did something rare on a continent too often scarred by leaders who clung to office. He proved that leadership is not about control, but service. He used his influence not to enrich himself, but to uplift others. He established the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focused on education, health, and human rights. He championed the fight against HIV/AIDS, even as stigma silenced others. When his own son died of the disease, Mandela spoke openly, shattering the silence with the weight of truth. But his greatest legacy was in how he lived after the presidency. He was no longer a politician. He was a statesman, a moral compass in a world often adrift. From addressing world leaders to sitting beside children in village schools, Mandela never lost touch with the people who mattered most. His presence alone brought calm. His words carried the weight of wisdom forged in suffering, and his laughter, that deep, unhurried laugh, reminded the world that even revolutionaries can be gentle. The global tributes poured in long before his death in 2013. Streets were renamed, statues were raised, awards were given, but Mandela's true memorial is not cast in bronze or inked in textbooks. It is lived out in every act of courage, every stand for justice, every hand extended in peace. He was not perfect. He never claimed to be, but in a world desperate for light, Nelson Mandela burned bright, not as a saint, but as a servant. His long walk may be over, but his footsteps remain. The lion has rested, but his roar still echoes. Nelson Mandela walked a path few could endure, from barefoot boy in Kunu to prisoner, president, and peacemaker. But his journey wasn't just for him. It was for all of us. His story is not a chapter closed, but a call to action, because the struggle for justice, dignity, and unity continues. If this story moved you, if Madiba's courage inspired you, then walk with us. There are more voices to be heard, more stories to be told. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful journeys that shape our world. The walk isn't over, and neither are we.